Something happened today that requires immediate and careful analysis. A high-level Iranian delegation arrived in Doha this morning, including Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, to discuss the roadblocks to a permanent peace deal with the United States. Iran's central bank governor was also part of the delegation. This was not a routine diplomatic meeting. This was Iran's most senior negotiating team, assembled in one room in Qatar, working through the specific language disputes that have held up the memorandum of understanding that both sides said last weekend was largely negotiated. While those talks were underway, hours after the Iranian delegation arrived in Doha, the United States launched what it called self-defense strikes against Iranian missile launch sites and boats attempting to emplace mines in the Strait of Hormuz. Let me say that again so the full significance is clear.
Iran's foreign minister was in Doha negotiating a peace deal. The United States struck Iran's military positions at the same time. That is what happened today. And the question I want to analyze carefully, not emotionally but analytically, is what it means for the deal, for the ceasefire, and for the American claim that these negotiations are, in Trump's words, proceeding nicely. Let me first establish what the deal was supposed to look like as of 48 hours ago, because the gap between that description and today's military action is the entire story. On Saturday, Trump announced that a peace deal with Iran that would reopen the Strait of Hormuz is largely negotiated and will be announced shortly. He wrote that an agreement has been largely negotiated, subject to finalization between the United States of America, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the various other countries. National Army Museum, largely negotiated, subject to finalization, announced shortly. That was Saturday. United States officials said the deal would lead to Iran reaching an agreement to dispose of its enriched uranium stockpile, though how that would be done remained under discussion. One senior official told reporters an agreement would not be signed on Sunday, saying the Iranian system did not move fast enough. The official said Washington understood that Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei had endorsed the broad template of the deal. History. Iran's supreme leader had endorsed the broad template. The deal was largely negotiated. It would be announced shortly. Then today, while Iran's foreign minister sat in Doha discussing the final language, the United States military struck Iranian positions in southern Iran. Iranian state-linked media framed today's strikes as violations of the ceasefire. Iranian officials have not yet formally commented. We are the mighty. The absence of a formal Iranian comment at this stage is significant. It suggests Tehran is deciding how to characterize what happened, whether to call it a ceasefire violation that justifies a response, or to absorb it and continue the Doha talks. That decision will determine whether the Memorandum of Understanding survives this week. Now let me address the American framing of what happened. CENTCOM spokesperson Navy Captain Tim Hawkins said in a statement, targets included missile launch sites and Iranian boats attempting to emplace mines. U.S. Central Command continues to defend our forces while using restraint during the ongoing ceasefire. Self-defense restraint, ongoing ceasefire. 3 claims in one statement. Each requires examination. The self-defense claim rests on the assertion that Iranian boats were attempting to emplace mines, that is, lay new mines in the strait, and that this constituted an imminent threat to United States forces. That framing allows the United States to strike during a ceasefire without characterizing it as a ceasefire violation, because the argument is that Iran violated the ceasefire first by attempting to lay mines. The restraint claim is interesting given that what is being described as restrained is a strike on Iranian military positions during active peace negotiations in Doha, and the ongoing ceasefire framing is the most revealing of the 3. The United States is insisting the ceasefire is still in effect even after striking Iranian positions. That is a position that requires Iran's cooperation to maintain. If Iran accepts that framing, that the strikes were self-defense within the ceasefire rather than a ceasefire violation, then the talks can continue. If Iran rejects that framing, the ceasefire is effectively over. An Al Jazeera correspondent noted that there have been a number of skirmishes like this, particularly just after the start of the ceasefire, At the time, Trump said he did not consider these to be a breach of the ceasefire. This is an important context point. This is not the first time the United States has struck Iranian positions during what it simultaneously calls a ceasefire. The pattern since April 8th has been consistent. Military exchanges continue. Both sides characterize their own actions as defensive, and the ceasefire framework continues to be invoked as if it still governs the situation. The question is whether that pattern can continue to hold when Iran's most senior negotiators are sitting in Doha trying to finalize a deal, and the United States military is striking Iranian positions in the same hours. Let me address what was actually holding up the deal before today's strikes, because that context matters enormously for understanding whether the talks can survive this. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said talks on an agreement with Iran are partly being held up by the wording of the deal. U.S. officials confirmed that disputes over language on Iran's nuclear program and the lifting of sanctions have held it up. We are the mighty wording, language disputes. That is what was holding up a deal that was described as largely negotiated 48 hours ago. What specific words? The nuclear file. The question of how Iran's commitment to not obtaining a nuclear weapon is phrased, verified, and enforced. And the sequencing of sanctions relief. When does America lift pressure, and what does Iran do first? Iran's Fars news agency reported that the Strait of Hormuz would remain under Iran's management, according to the latest exchanged text between Iran and the United States. The report dismissed Trump's announcement of reopening the strait as part of a largely negotiated deal as incomplete and inconsistent with reality. Trump also failed to mention any agreement on Iran's nuclear program or its highly enriched uranium, both of which his administration has repeatedly cited as critical to ending the war. National Army Museum, Iran's official state news agency, was calling Trump's characterization of the deal incomplete and inconsistent with reality before today's strikes. Iran has sought to put off nuclear talks until after a formal cessation in hostilities. America insists nuclear must be addressed within the framework. Iran says the strait will remain under Iranian management. America says it will reopen freely. Iran's Fars agency says Trump's announcement is incomplete. America's officials say the supreme leader endorsed the broad template. Two sides, two completely different descriptions of the same document. And today, while they were trying to reconcile those descriptions in Doha, America struck. Now, let me give you the structural analysis that I think is most important for understanding what today means for the broader negotiation. The United States has been operating on an assumption since the ceasefire of April 8th that military pressure and diplomatic engagement can run simultaneously, that strikes can continue within a ceasefire framework as long as they are characterized as self-defense, and that this dual-track approach maintains American leverage without formally ending the ceasefire. That assumption has a limit, and that limit is reached when the military action is sufficiently significant or sufficiently timed that Iran's leadership cannot accept the self-defense framing without appearing domestically as if they have accepted American impunity to strike during negotiations. Trump simultaneously sought to tie the peace negotiations to a commitment by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Pakistan to sign up to the Abraham Accords to normalize ties with Israel. Global security. This is a new demand that was not part of the framework described last weekend. Trump is now conditioning the peace deal, or at least linking it publicly, to Abraham Accords commitments from the three countries that have been serving as mediators in these negotiations. Qatar has been hosting Iran's delegation today. Pakistan has been the primary mediator. Saudi Arabia has been the Gulf state most directly affected by the Hormuz closure. Demanding that those three countries normalize ties with Israel as part of an Iran deal is not a small additional condition. It is a demand that reconfigures the entire diplomatic geography of the agreement and introduces conditions that none of those three governments have agreed to. Iran's reaction to that demand, which came simultaneously with today's strikes, has not yet been stated. But it is worth considering what it means for the Doha delegation to be sitting in Qatar, a country Trump is now publicly pressuring to sign the Abraham Accords while trying to negotiate a peace framework. Deutsche Bank analysts wrote in a note this morning, optimism is still elevated that an agreement can be made to end the war. Last night's targeted action by the United States is clearly a warning shot that the ceasefire is fragile, though, so we will have to see what the next few days of negotiations bring. We are the mighty, a warning shot. That is how Deutsche Bank is characterizing it. Not a ceasefire violation, not a collapse, a warning shot. That framing is the most analytically honest characterization of what the United States may have intended. Not to end the negotiations, not to restart full combat, but to signal to Iran that America retains the military option and is not so eager for a deal that it will accept Iranian mine laying during talks without a response. The problem with warning shot strategy during peace negotiations is that it requires the other side to receive the message the way you intend it. If Iran receives today's strikes as a warning shot that motivates flexibility in Doha, the strategy worked. If Iran receives them as evidence that America cannot be trusted to hold a ceasefire while its foreign minister is negotiating in good faith, the strategy failed, and the Doha talks end without a memorandum. The answer to that question is not yet known. Iran has not formally responded. The IRGC has reportedly threatened retaliation, but has not acted. The Doha delegation's status at this moment, whether they are still in the room or have departed, has not been confirmed. Let me close with what I believe the honest analytical picture looks like from where we stand today. The deal described as largely negotiated on Saturday had at least three unresolved disputes before today's strikes: the nuclear language, the sanctions sequencing, the Iranian demand that the strait remain under Iranian management versus American demand for free navigation. Today's strikes added a fourth variable: Iran's decision about how to characterize them, ceasefire violation or absorbed incident, will determine whether the Doha process survives the next 48 hours. And Trump's new demand connecting the peace deal to Abraham Accords commitments from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan introduced a fifth variable that none of the mediating countries were expecting to manage. Trump wrote on Truth Social, "It will only be a great deal for all or no deal at all, back to the battlefront and shooting, but bigger and stronger than ever before." And nobody wants that. That statement was posted this morning. The same morning, American forces struck Iranian positions in southern Iran. The same morning, Iran's foreign minister was sitting in Doha. Nobody wants that. Back to the battlefront. That is true. Neither side wants full resumption of combat. The question is whether the accumulation of today's events, the strikes, the new Abraham Accords demand, the language disputes that were already unresolved, has moved the situation from largely negotiated to something considerably less certain. From everything I can assess today, the answer is yes. The deal that was described as largely negotiated on Saturday is not where it was on Saturday. Whether it is collapsed, delayed, or merely complicated is a question that will be answered in the next 48 hours in Doha. What is not in question is this: today, America struck Iran while Iran's foreign minister was in the same country trying to end the war. That fact stands regardless of what either side says about it.